The ashtray shattered against the wall just inches from Jack Silverman's head, bursting into fragments of crystal and a cloud of cigarette ash that hung in the air like a sudden storm. It was February 14th, 1961, late afternoon inside the private office of the Desert Inn Casino in Las Vegas. The room smelled of expensive liquor, polished wood, and tension. Behind the large mahogany desk stood Dean Martin, the man the world knew as the smooth, unbothered king of cool. But the relaxed smile that usually accompanied him on stage was gone. His face was flushed with anger, his finger aimed at Silverman like a warning shot. "You listen to me very carefully," Dean said, his voice low and steady, the street kid from Steubenville breaking through the polished Hollywood exterior. "If Sammy Davis Jr. can't walk through the front door of this casino like every other performer, then Dean Martin isn't walking through it either. And if I'm not walking through it, neither is Frank Sinatra. You understand that, Jack? No Sammy, no me. No me, no Frank. No Frank, no business." Silverman sat frozen in his leather chair. He had spent decades building his fortune by reading people, calculating pressure points, and knowing exactly when someone was bluffing. But as he stared at Dean Martin standing in front of him, he realized something chilling. Dean wasn't bluffing. The relaxed crooner who normally avoided conflict had just drawn a line that could shake the entire power structure of Las Vegas. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to picture Las Vegas in 1961. The city glittered in the Nevada desert like a neon dream, a playground of gambling, music, and late-night indulgence. Beneath the glamour, however, lived a brutal reality. The casinos on the Strip were segregated. Black entertainers could perform on stage and bring in crowds of wealthy white tourists, but the moment the curtain fell, their welcome ended. They couldn't sleep in the hotel rooms, eat in the restaurants, gamble at the tables, or even swim in the pools. When their performances ended, security quietly escorted them out the back door and drove them across town to the west side, the black neighborhood where the cheaper motels accepted them without question. Among the performers forced to live with this humiliation was Sammy Davis Jr. Ironically, Sammy was arguably the most talented member of the famous Rat Pack. He could sing, dance, play multiple instruments, perform flawless impressions, and command a stage with unmatched energy. Crowds adored him. Yet despite being one of the biggest entertainers in America, he wasn't allowed to stay in the very hotels where audiences cheered him. Night, after performing alongside Sinatra and Martin, Sammy would leave through a service entrance and ride across town to a small rooming house with no air conditioning and shared bathrooms. Meanwhile, Sinatra and Martin slept in luxury suites upstairs. It was degrading. Everyone knew it. But nobody challenged it openly because Las Vegas was controlled by powerful casino owners and mob-connected investors. If a performer complained too loudly, bookings could disappear overnight. Sammy rarely spoke about it. Publicly, he smiled and shrugged it off, telling reporters it was just the way things were. Inside, though, the humiliation cut deep. Watching it happen made Dean Martin furious in a quiet, simmering way. Dean understood discrimination more than people realized. Before the fame, before the tuxedos and sold-out theaters, he had grown up in a working-class Italian family in Steubenville, Ohio. His father had even changed his name from Gaetano to Guy just to avoid prejudice in his barbershop. Dean knew what it meant to be treated as less than equal because of who you were. So every time he saw Sammy forced into that humiliating routine, cheer on stage, exit through the back door, it stayed with him. The breaking point came when the Rat Pack booked a 2-week run at the Desert Inn. It was supposed to be one of the biggest engagements in Las Vegas. Sinatra, Martin, Davis, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop performing together. The casino expected massive crowds and enormous profits. But 3 days before opening night, Dean learned something that made his blood boil. Jack Silverman had refused to give Sammy a room in the hotel. The message was simple. Sammy could perform, but he wasn't staying there. He would go to the west side like always. Dean's manager broke the news to him over the phone while he was packing at home in Beverly Hills. The manager sounded nervous, like someone delivering bad news that could explode. "Dino, we've got a problem," he said. "Silverman says Sammy can't stay at the Desert Inn." Dean didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched across the phone line until it became uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "Call Silverman," he said calmly. "Tell him I want a meeting tomorrow." "Dean, maybe we should let Frank handle this." "Frank doesn't know yet," Dean interrupted, "and he's not going to. This one's between me and Silverman." The next morning, Dean flew to Las Vegas alone. No announcements, no entourage, no drama. He rented a car and drove straight to the Desert Inn. Silverman's office sat high above the Strip, decorated with expensive furniture that screamed wealth but lacked any real taste. Thick carpets, leather chairs, abstract paintings that cost a fortune but meant nothing. Silverman himself waited behind his desk, a short, sharp-eyed businessman who had survived decades in the ruthless casino world. "Dean," he greeted with a tight smile. "Good to see you. Want a drink?" "No," Dean replied. "We need to talk about Sammy." Silverman's smile faded slightly. "Look, Dean, it's nothing personal," he said quickly. "It's just policy. We don't house colored performers here." Dean stared at him. "A liability," Silverman continued as if reading from a prepared explanation. "Insurance, customer comfort, reputation. You know how it is." "They don't want to see black people," Dean said flatly. Silverman stiffened. "This isn't about prejudice. It's about business." Dean stepped closer to the desk. "And where exactly is Sammy supposed to stay?" "The West Side," Silverman said. "Like always." Dean let out a quiet breath. "You expect him to entertain your guests all night and then sleep in some rundown boarding house while we stay upstairs?" Silverman shrugged. "That's the system." Dean looked around the office slowly. The expensive desk, the glittering city beyond the window, the symbol of power Silverman believed he controlled. Then Dean spoke. "Well, here's a new system." Silverman looked up. "If Sammy Davis Jr. doesn't get a room here," Dean said calmly, "I'm not staying here. If I'm not staying here, I'm not performing here. And if I'm not performing here, Sinatra isn't performing either. That means this entire Rat Pack engagement disappears." Silverman laughed nervously. "You're bluffing." Dean didn't smile. "Am I?" The laughter died quickly. Silverman began explaining pressures. The casino investors, the mob connections, the fear that integrating the hotel would anger powerful people. He talked about tradition, about rules, about how Vegas worked. Dean listened quietly until finally he picked up a heavy crystal ashtray from the desk. "You know what I think, Jack?" he said thoughtfully, turning the ashtray in his hands. "I think you're scared. Scared that if things change, you'll lose control." Silverman's face reddened. "Get out of my office." Dean suddenly hurled the ashtray at the wall. It exploded with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. Glass rained onto the carpet. Dean leaned across the desk, his voice now colder than anger. "No Sammy, no show." Then he walked out. The next morning at exactly 7:47 a.m., the phone rang in Dean's hotel room at the Sands. Silverman's assistant delivered the message. A suite had been arranged for Sammy Davis Jr. at the Desert Inn. When Sammy arrived that evening and walked through the front doors like any other guest, history quietly shifted. For the first time, a black performer was staying at a major Las Vegas casino as an equal. Dean simply handed him a room key. "You're on the 5th floor," he said casually, "right next to me and Frank." Sammy stared at the key in disbelief. "How did you—" "Don't worry about it," Dean said. That night, the Rat Pack show felt electric. Something invisible had changed in the room. Backstage, Sinatra eventually learned what had happened and confronted Dean with half-amused disbelief. "You threatened to walk out?" Sinatra asked. Dean shrugged. "We threatened to walk." Within months, other casinos quietly began changing their policies too. Not out of moral enlightenment, but fear. If stars like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra were willing to walk away from millions, the old system could collapse overnight. By 1963, Sammy Davis Jr. could stay at any hotel on the Strip. Las Vegas didn't transform overnight, but the change had begun. Years later, Sammy never forgot what Dean had done. Long after the lights dimmed on the Rat Pack era, the memory remained. One afternoon in 1961, when the smoothest man in show business walked into an office, threw an ashtray at the wall, and demanded dignity for his friend. The world always thought Dean Martin didn't care about anything, but sometimes the coolest people care the most. They just don't make a show of it.